You're listening to the Faith and Work Podcast, where we explore ways to serve God and others in our daily work to bring life and hope to workplaces and cities.
Welcome to the Faith and Work Podcast. I'm Ross Chapman, your host, and today we're bringing you another special episode following up the last one, where we were really focused on this theme of making mercy more common in commerce. And the theme was really built around one of Jesus's most famous parables, maybe the most famous parable, the Good Samaritan, and how it actually functions as a meta definition for how we lead, invest, and build companies. All that to say, what it really means is it should be influencing our daily decisions at work, how we fulfill our responsibilities, and how we treat the people around us, whether they're customers, coworkers, or shareholders. And so you're going to hear from Dr. Ken Barnes. Ken is one of the coolest people I have ever met, and I mean that so sincerely. He has 30 years in the corporate world, traveling globally for some of the biggest companies in the world, and he's also a theologian who has been a pastor in the UK and is now serving at the Mockler Center for Faith in the Workplace at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in Boston. He's the author of Redeeming Capitalism and Sabbath as Resilience. What amazing titles. You should definitely check those out. And in this talk, he's going to challenge us to move beyond the idea of servant leadership as Christian leadership, which is kind of like a buzzword, and instead look at the idea of ordered loves, which comes from Augustine, and reflecting on the nature of God and how that should fuel you as a leader in your workplace. It's an incredible opportunity to learn from somebody with a ton of wisdom. And in fact, we've had Dr. Barnes on the podcast before. If you want to check out what he said about the new tariffs that happened in April-ish 2025, you can check that episode out. It's called Economic Wisdom in a Time of Tariffs. Following Ken's talk, you're going to hear from Max Anderson. He's the CEO and co-founder of Saturn V, which is a company that buys a bunch of other companies, small to medium-sized businesses. Max would say he just buys old businesses that are really boring and tries to help them succeed and do well. And so the whole point is to hold on to these companies for the long term, which is kind of the antithesis of what private equity does. And Max has had an incredible career journey. Let me tell you a little bit about it. Instead of sort of going from point A to point B in a straight line, his career, it actually goes like all over the place, up and down and backwards and forwards. And you'll hear him talk about that. But he's been at McKinsey & Company. He's pastored alongside Tim Keller in New York City. He's gone to Harvard Business School. He wrote a book while at Harvard Business School called The MBA Oath. And he's worked at the world's largest hedge fund. So he's had an incredibly varied and quite profound experience. And you're going to get to hear some practical wisdom about what a mercy-shaped business actually looks like when you're dealing with investors and companies who do things like crush concrete and do more good stuff with it. You can actually watch these two talks on our YouTube channel. We'd love for you to check them out. That way you can actually follow along with the slides from the talk. That might help you more. So please enjoy the wisdom and stories of both Ken and Max, which were recorded live at this year's Business for the Common Good.
Good morning. So some of you might be asking the question, why at a business conference would you invite a theologian? I think that's a pretty reasonable question. I think the answer may lie in the fact that I am not a career academic, as much as I love my life in the academy. I actually spent about 30 years doing business all over the world for some of the biggest companies in the world. And I know how difficult it is to be a Christian leader in a secular environment. And what I found is that the higher up I went in organizations, the more difficult it became. And I also found the higher up I moved in organizations, the more necessary it was for Christians to be in leadership positions. Because if you think about the logic of it, if Christians don't take leadership positions in business and industry and in government and in other areas of the public square, what will replace us? And that is a very, very sobering question. So one of the things I started to ask myself when I made the decision to leave the safety of the corporate world and go into academics is, what exactly is Christian leadership? Now, that is not an academic question. It is actually an incredibly pertinent question for all of you in this room. Because I have to tell you that when I ask that question of my leadership class students, these are graduate students, these are doctoral students, these are smart people, what constitutes Christian leadership, I get a certain degree of pretty common answers. So one of them is, well, servant leadership. Now, you can't argue with the notion that servant leadership is a Christian ideal. I mean, we've got lots of examples of this. We've got Jesus washing the disciples' feet. We've got Jesus as the good shepherd. We've got the Apostle Paul in Philippians talking about the fact that Christians shouldn't think too highly of themselves. They should emulate Christ, who, though he was God, became human for our sake. He became a slave in order to lead. I mean, obviously, that's one of the concepts of Christian leadership. But folks, it's only one piece of the puzzle. We've got to think much more broadly than just servant leadership. So some people say, well, how about biblical leadership in general? Well, that's a good idea too. Because in the Bible, we have a lot of guidance about leadership. We also have a lot of examples of good leaders, but there's a warning here. There's a lot of bad leaders in the Bible too. In fact, 2/3 of all the kings of Israel and Judah were bad leaders. And even some of the good leaders had personal characteristics that people use to excuse bad ethics on the part of our current leaders, and that is not acceptable. So we can't use biblical leaders as case studies the way we would use other forms of case studies in business and economics. So we have to be careful. So we have to go a little bit bigger. Now, one of the things I'll often have people say is, what about virtuous leadership? Well, look, I've got a book out there called Redeeming Capitalism, and the whole book is about virtuous economics. I get virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is incredibly important. However, again, when we talk about normative ethics, a construct to help us discern right from wrong, we realize that there are limits to any of those normative constructs because being a Christian transcends them all. So when I was teaching my ethics class, I was teaching them about virtue ethics and deontological ethics and utilitarian ethics, and a student asked me, which one is Christian? And the example is, sometimes any of them can be. And that's what made me realize that we needed an even broader definition of what it means to be Christian ethics or Christian leadership or Christian anything. We needed a meta definition. And this is the definition I want to share with you. This is my definition of Christian leadership. And that is leadership that reflects the being, the nature, and the character of God. Think of those three things: the being, the nature, and the character of God. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? I've got to unpack some of that. So by the being, I mean that we have to acknowledge who God is. And you can't acknowledge who God is until you acknowledge the fact that God is. In fact, the very most important thing we can know about God is that God exists. So when Moses said to God, who should I tell the people is sending me? What does God say? He doesn't say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says, you tell them, Yahweh, I am. Or for you linguists out there, I will be whom I will be, sent you. And here's the problem. We have an awful lot of people in leadership positions who are Christians on Sunday, but during the week, they kind of forget God exists. And that is a very, very dangerous thing. Another is that we've got to submit to the sovereignty of God. Nietzsche was right. Most human beings think that we're little gods who happen to go to the bathroom. But the fact of the matter is, if God is not Lord of all, God is not Lord at all. So Christian leadership means we've got to constantly remember we are not the boss. I don't care if you started the company with $2 in your pocket. God has got to be the boss. And thirdly, we've got to embrace the Trinity. Why? Because the Trinity is not a theological curiosity. The Trinity is fundamental to who God is. God exists in perfect community with the Godhead itself. And we are created in the image of that God. So that means community has got to be at the center of why we even bother to create wealth. That's the being. The nature is relatively simple. God is love. Not that God loves, or we love God. God is love. Beloved, let us love one another because love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. So that begs the question, what is love? Now, the Bible, interestingly, doesn't actually give us a word to answer that question as much as a symbol. The words came later. The symbol came first, and that symbol is the cross. When he who had everything gave it all away for those of us who had nothing, which is all of us, when it comes to eternal matters. Now, some of you may recall there was a debate on X about a year ago between the Vice President of the United States and a member of Parliament who had retired from Parliament in the UK, because the Vice President had been on a news program and he was trying to defend the administration's immigration policy, and he said, look, there's this old tradition, and it's Christian, I think, that first you love your family, then you love your neighbor, then you love your community, then you love the citizens of your country, and after that, you can think about other people. Well, that really set the cat amongst the pigeons, I have to tell you. I mean, the internet absolutely blew up. Now, the Vice President is a Roman Catholic. Can you imagine what it was like when he woke up one day and the Pope had tweeted that he got it wrong? And of course, one of the terms he used in his exchange with this member of Parliament, he said, look up ordo amoris. Now, I venture to guess 99% of the people who are on Twitter had never even heard of the term ordo amoris. But boy, are people talking about it now. And I want to also make it very clear, I'm not picking on the Vice President, because almost everybody gets this wrong. Almost everybody gets it wrong. So let me share with you the wrong and the right of ordo amoris. The term ordo amoris simply means the order of love, or ordered love. And the reason why it's misunderstood is because it's understood as a hierarchy of limited affections. In other words, we only have so much love that we can give, so there's a very strict subsequent consequence of our love. So we love God, then we love our family, then we love our friends, then we love our neighbors, then we love, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can sort of see it becoming this rather limited asset that we have. But the problem with it is that it starts with the presumption that we, the self, constitute the subject of love, and everyone we have affection for, they are the objects of love. And in fact, that is incorrect. Because what we do in that construct is we make God an object of love. And Scripture says the opposite. It says that God is love, which means instead of this hierarchy of affections based on a limited resource of love, what we actually should do is think of ourselves with God as the subjects of love, and everyone for whom we show love is anyone who falls into our proximity, with whom we have a proper relationship, and for whom we have a proportionate amount of love to share. And that means, instead of a hierarchy, we have a properly ordered process. You see the difference between this hierarchy and this process of ordered love, which, as Aquinas himself says, might mean that you take care of a stranger's needs before you even take care of a family member's needs if you are proximate to that need and you have the ability to meet it. And guess where he got that from? Yes, the Good Samaritan. Absolutely. So the third piece is the character of God. What do I mean by the character of God? Well, here's how I understand the character of God. The character of God is revealed to us in the tension between God's kadesh, that's Hebrew, meaning holiness, and God's charis, which is Greek, meaning love or mercy or charity. That's what it means. It means that God's grace is in tension with God's holiness, and it's in that tension that God's character is revealed. And guess what else is revealed in that tension? A Latin word, misericordia, which means mercy. And if as Christian leaders we don't understand that the character of God is found in that tension, how are we going to deal with the situations we deal with on a daily basis where we are in that tension between doing what we think might be right and what we think might be good? I have to tell you, folks, that if you err too much on the side of Kadesh, you will become overbearing and unbearable as a leader. But if you err too much on the side of Charis, you will have no organization at all. That's why it's hard to be a Christian leader. So what are these implications? Here they are. 1, is God at the center of who you are and what you do? That's the first question you have to ask yourself. And that means every day and all day, every day, is God at the center? I don't know how often you pray during the workday, but I hope you pray continually as the Scripture commands. Because you are under attack every single day to not be a Christian leader. And you will forget that God exists very quickly. There was a wonderful movie a few years ago called Becket, about Thomas à Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Henry II. And the Archbishop of Canterbury dies, and Henry turns to Becket, who isn't even a priest, but he works for the king, and he says, I'm going to make you the next Archbishop of Canterbury. And Becket doesn't want the job. He's like, no. He goes, the bishops would allow it. And the king says, you let me handle the bishops. And finally, as a last ditch resort, Becket says, what about God? And Henry II says, one can always come to an arrangement with God. How many business leaders say that to themselves every single time they're faced with an ethical dilemma? Secondly, properly ordered love should be the driving force behind who you are and what you do. Not this imaginary hierarchy which says I'm off the hook for anybody who isn't really personally close to me, but this notion that there's a properly ordered process that God puts in place so that I have to assess every single day the propriety, the proximity, and the probability of my being able to help somebody who maybe I hadn't otherwise given a second thought to. And then the question is the character of God manifest in who you are and what you do? And I can tell you in my own career in business, this was the hardest one. Because every single day you're faced with a dilemma. Do I close a factory, open a factory, pay a dividend, not pay a dividend, go offshore, not go offshore, hire someone, fire someone, punish someone, every single day. And the closer you are to the top of the organization, the greater the ramifications. But trust me when I tell you, if you get this part right, you will be much closer to being a Christian leader. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Ross Chapman, CEO at Denver Institute for Faith and Work. We want to see a future where every person's work brings hope and life to their city, which is a contrast with society's views of work, and for now, it's often a contrast with the views of work we hear at church. That's why I'm excited to share with you that we are currently in the midst of our FOR campaign. That's the FOR campaign, meaning this is a vision for the future of work, workers, church, and cities. Like you, we've noticed a lack of accessible, biblically grounded, and excellent vocational discipleship opportunities. This gap is causing many to have an anemic or a lifeless vision of their work. Vocational discipleship can come from many places in your life, such as this podcast. And as we seek to expand those opportunities with high-quality content over the next 5 years, our aim is to help 100,000 people recognize and affirm their daily work is central to joining God in His vision and work to make all things new. If you've been encouraged and discipled by thoughtful conversations that you hear on the Faith and Work podcast, or if your life has been shaped by Denver Institute in some way, I encourage you to help advance this mission through the way you work and by giving. Will you consider a one-time, quarterly, or monthly gift to support this work? If so, visit the give page at denverinstitute.org to get started.
Okay, good morning. My name is Max Anderson, and as Jeff Hainan so kindly reminded me, I did give the wrong name to this conference 10 years ago. So thank you, Jeff. I am also, in addition to that, the CEO and co-founder of Saturn V, and I'm delighted to be here. I got to speak at the first conference 10 years ago, and it's amazing how far it's come. And so congratulations to the whole team. There's a lot I want to share with you. I'll try to go fast. When I was in high school and college, I thought my life would look like this. Maybe a little more up and to the right is how I thought I should draw it. In reality, it's felt more like this. I was born here in Denver. I grew up in Lakewood. That's my mom with me, looking tired because I was such an alert and active baby. That's my dad and my sister. And here my family is a picture from a couple of years ago. But when I was their age, I used to really look up to my grandfather, Elwood, who was a turkey and almond farmer in the Central Valley of California. And I thought he was the greatest person. I wanted to be like him when I grew up. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a turkey and almond farmer, though. I thought maybe I wanted to be an actor. That's me as the Scarecrow in the Creighton Middle School production of The Wizard of Oz. And I went on from there to Princeton, where I studied history, I met my wife, and I grew deeply in my faith. I also learned about a different career path than I had ever heard of before, management consulting. After graduating, I joined McKinsey & Company. I moved to New York City, and I started helping financial institutions become more profitable. This is the part where some of you are thinking, man, this is getting really dark. But I love New York. I didn't love consulting, though. I felt like I wasn't maybe using my God-given gifts to the way that I could really worship him the best, that maybe I was leaving something on the table, that maybe I should do something more spiritual. I thought maybe I should become a pastor. So I left McKinsey. I'm the only one in my Anna's class that did this, and went to join a church. I started working with Tim Keller at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York, and was studying to become an urban church planter. And a funny thing happened. I was there, and Tim taught me so much about the gospel, but he also taught me about work. And he said it is really a lie to think that the highest form of spiritual calling is to be a pastor, and then just below that is to be in a nonprofit, and way below that is to be in business. He said, actually, God made all of work for his glory. I said, even business? He said, yes. I said, well, let's go. And I went to Harvard Business School, and I loved it. I interned at Google. I got a job at a hedge fund after graduation. But this was a weird time. It was the global financial crisis. I graduated in 2009, and MBAs were not popular at that point. I read one article saying that, Harvard Business School was producing the next Darth Vaders of the economy. And I was like, geez, this is terrible. And it wasn't certainly how I experienced my classmates or what, their dreams were or my own. And I said, let's make a symbolic statement about how we want to live differently. And so we came up with this idea of creating like a pledge or an oath, like a Hippocratic oath, but for managers. We called it the MBA oath, and the idea essentially was to create value responsibly, to think about the different stakeholders in a business's organization, from the owners to the employees, to the customers, the vendors, the community around. And it got some traction. 2/3 of our class signed this pledge. Some kids at some other business schools heard about it. They asked if they could do it too. Long story short, thousands of MBAs around the world, hundreds of business schools did this, and we got covered in all these news outlets, from the New York Times to John Oliver did a segment for the Daily Show. I was like, wow, we've really made it. I got a call from Penguin and ended up writing a book about it. And I was so excited to take these ideas into my next professional step, which was to work for this guy, Ray Dalio, who founded Bridgewater Associates, which is the world's largest hedge fund. And if you haven't been following the talk now, I will refer you back to this squiggly line. Turkey farmer, management consultant, pastor, MBA, author, hedge fund. I was thrashing about, and I felt inadequate because I felt like, gosh, why am I not understanding what God has laid out for me? Why am I going all these different ways? I was all over the place. I was looking for my calling. But I was at Bridgewater, and I realized a couple of things. First is that our calling is not something that God is hiding from us. Our calling is very clear, and that's to love him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and is to love our neighbors as ourselves. And we can do that at a hedge fund or at a church or on a turkey ranch. The other thing that made an influence on me was I came across this quote by Annie Dillard, who said, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. And I think that's so true. And for me, my days were beginning at leaving the house at 6 a.m. to do a long commute from Manhattan up to Connecticut, and then not getting home off until 10 o'clock or midnight. And I was like, I don't know, this is the way that God really wants me to love him and other people. Not because it's bad, but because I just have nothing left. I wanted to have more times like this. And so I left. And the first thing I did was I started writing. I created a newsletter called The Weekend Reader, and where I covered topics in culture and theology and technology. The second thing I did was I joined a group called Praxis, which the Denver Institute has a partnership with, whose mission is to help entrepreneurs who are motivated by their faith start new redemptive ventures. And while I was mentoring some entrepreneurs in this program, I made a friend named Evan Loomis, who was also doing the same thing. And we really enjoyed each other. We enjoyed working together, and we had a similar view of what we wanted to do. And we said, let's go into business together. And we created a company That's called Saturn V. Saturn V is an investment firm, and basically what we do is buy boring businesses from old people. Which isn't completely fair because some of the businesses are not boring and some of the people are not old, but by and large, there are more than 10 million small business owners who are 55 or older, and a lot of them are looking to exit. And what are they going to do when they do that? Are they going to shut the business down, pass it on to their kids or employees, or find someone to sell to? We wanted to be a group that they would trust to sell to. And so we started buying companies. This is me with Dave Stefanich, who owned All Demolition Excavating Company. I like businesses where you know what they do in the title of the business. Our first acquisition was a company called Concrete Curb and Paving. Do you know what they do? Taylor's in the room. But we're kind of like a poor man's Berkshire Hathaway. We've been acquiring controlling stakes in businesses, first only in Denver, then across Colorado, and now across the country. And over the last 9 years, we have a portfolio now of 25 companies that employ 1,700 people, and last year did $400 million in sales. I feel like for the first time, this is my calling. Not because it's turning out to seem like it's going to succeed, or because we're making money, but because I feel like it is a mixture of the things that God has prepared me to do through my past experiences where I can love Him and love other people more. If you're wondering what it's like to discover your calling, in the process of it, I'd say it feels like this. And when you look backwards, it can start to feel like this. I'm supposed to talk to you about the practices of mercy-shaped businesses. And I just want to acknowledge that like being up here is a big temptation toward pride. And I'm reminded of Jesus' story of the Pharisee and the tax collector. The tax collector, it was in the back of the temple. The Pharisee goes to the front, prays very loudly and says, "Thank you, God, that I'm not like these other people, these robbers and bandits. I give 10%. I fast twice a week." He was a good person, but he wanted everyone to know it. Meanwhile, the tax collector stood in the back of the temple and beat his breast and said, "Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner." And Jesus said, only one of these is justified before God. And it is not the guy who is doing the good works. It was the tax collector who came in humility and said, "I need your mercy." And so, what is a mercy-shaped business? My conclusion is that a mercy-shaped business has to be a business that is shaped by the reality of God's mercy. That, as Jeff said, we are not necessarily the Good Samaritan. We are first must see ourselves as the man who's beaten, naked, and ashamed at the side of the road. But a Samaritan from Nazareth came along and lived the life we should have lived and died the death for us that we should die, so that we might, in response to that mercy, show mercy to others. Now that's pretty simple. And if I was from a different faith tradition, I would say just go and do likewise. Let the Spirit lead and do good things, whatever it leads. But I'm not from that tradition. I'm a Presbyterian. Which means I feel compelled to overthink it. And if possible, come up with an overly complex theological framework for response, which I have done. I think you could insert your job title or your industry on top of this page and think about it for yourself, but in three lenses of what is the intent, execution, and outcome of what I'm doing. The intent, what am I trying to do? What's the goal? The execution, how is it being done? And the outcome, what are the actual results, regardless of what the original intent was? And then you can complicate it further by thinking through a lens of creation, fall, and redemption. Creation. How does this thing represent God's goodness and His eternal purpose? Fall, in what ways is sin breaking this industry or this job? And what false idols exist that I'm tempted to worship? Redemption, how can I respond to the mercy of God by thinking creatively and mercifully for others? So I've thought this through for our line of work in private company investing. I'd like to take you through every one of these bullet points. Just kidding. You can take a picture if you want. it doesn't matter almost what's up here for me particularly, but I'll share just a couple of vignettes as an example. It's again, it's not that I've got it right or that what's right for investing is right for if you're a hotel manager or a nursery school owner. But let's just go through creation. Our intent in private company investing is to create returns for our investors by building and stewarding companies that create value for people. So companies is a good word. The word company, the etymology is from the Latin roots com and panis. Com means with, panis means bread, so with bread, or put more artfully, a company is a group of people who eat together. And it's not just a supper club, of course, they're on a mission. It's a group of people who eat together and are on a mission. This is our company, what it looks like when we gather in the summer and we do strategic planning. We enjoy good wine and great food. And we think about how we can do our mission together, whether that is installing HVAC systems or taking people on dog sledding rides or laying concrete or launching new sparkling waters. Those are good things. But they, like everything else, are subject to the fall. And private equity, I would say, doesn't have the best reputation. And so you've got to think, well, what are the reasons for that? And I think you could look at, does this industry look at people as cost centers rather than drivers of value? Is there an incentive to take excessive risk? There is a structure within private equity, the fund, which is a 10-year fund life, where firms raise money from investors. They then have a few years to invest the money, a few years to run the company, then a few years to sell the company on to the next buyer. So in a sense, they're almost like renting the company instead of owning it. And when you have a rental car instead of a car you own, you treat it differently. And it's had a lot of negative effects that have hurt a lot of people. And so we thought, when we're starting our investment firm, can we think differently? Can we think in a redemptive way, have a mercy-filled response? What would it be like if we treated people as eternal, made in the image of God? How can we manage risk wisely? How can we have a long-term structure that helps us think with not just a short-term mindset? And I'll just quickly say a couple of examples of what that looks like in our experience. So we decided to set up funds that don't have sunset dates. They're permanent capital, which allows us to have a longer-term outlook and make hopefully long-term decisions for companies. It allows us to respond in mercy because we've been given mercy, to be less afraid of sharing bad news with investors, but to be honest and straightforward in a way that builds trust for the long term. It allows us to be really deeply invested in what the companies themselves are excited about. This is me at our company, All Demolition. One of the things we do is we crush concrete and we resell the gravel. And I'm there with Merle, our mechanic, Tanya, our general manager, Scotty, who runs the crushing machine. This is a new crushing machine. It cost $1 million. We saved up for several years, so we're all smiling because we did this together. And that's an exciting thing, to be on mission together. At that same company, we had a Christmas party the first year we owned it. And I went around talking to the employees and I said, what are you doing for Christmas this year? And I'd say a full third of them answered that with really no plans at all. They weren't going to be with family. They weren't going to be with friends. They were just going to be watching TV and ordering a pizza. And I thought, my goodness, this is not just people who are coming for a paycheck. We are their community. We have the chance to be their company. And what can that look like? It can look a little bit like this. So this will be my last story. This is Molly, who works with me. She was a 5280 fellow on the right, and Leo on the left was our CFO. Leo's a farm boy from Minnesota, one of 11 kids, and he typified Midwestern values: honest, hardworking, humble. A couple years into working with us, Leo was diagnosed with cancer, and it had spread very quickly. He kept working because he wanted to. But when it came to the end, on his last day on earth, our team went and joined his family at his bedside. And we stood there and we prayed and we cried and we hugged and we laughed about old stories. And we got to help be there in some of his final moments before leaving this world. And it felt so right to be there at that time, But also in retrospect, I know it sounds so weird, a private equity firm. Like, do you want the people you work with there at your bedside when you're dying? But we weren't just in business together. We were in a company together. We were those who ate together. And we perceived ourselves as on a mission together. And that mission was to learn how to love one another and love God. Last point, rest. Point 7, God rested on the 7th day. Pretty good, right? I want to live on the right-hand side of this chart. I want everything we do to be that creative and that merciful. The truth is, we're totally imperfect and totally failing. And we're still the guy on the side of the road. I'm ashamed of how much we could be doing when I hear some of the stories that are so inspiring today. And I'm excited about it. And it's just a reminder, again, I still need a Savior. We still do. But I have a great hope. And that hope is that whatever squiggles our companies look like and our lives take, we can think like Paul, who said, now we see dimly as through a mirror, then we will see fully. Now I know in part, and I'm known in part, then I shall know fully, as I'll be fully known. And we'll see that God, in his great goodness, takes all the things of our life, the things we don't understand or confusing at the time, and weaves them together in a beautiful way for his glory, for the sake of teaching us how to love, to give us the chance to practice mercy, and to bring us again to our Father who loves us immeasurably more than we can imagine. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Ken and Max's talks. I hope that you were encouraged. I hope you were challenged. And I hope that you can apply that in your everyday work. You know, it's pretty rare to hear talks from people with this incredible experience. So, you know, let's just reflect on what we learned. A couple things that stick out to me. Ken reminded us that if we err too much on the side of holiness in our leadership, we might become actually unbearable. But if we go too far on grace, then there's no accountability and nothing really gets done. So finding that balance and actually leaning into the reality that God came full of truth and grace, or that he's holy, but he's also gracious, is something informative for our work. Or Max sharing how he and his employees gathered around his CFO's bedside as he passed away. He reminded us that a company, it actually comes from the words with bread, which basically means we just eat bread together. We work together. We're a company. What a reframe for how we think of our everyday work. So I just hope that you would be reminded that as we go through our work from these last 2 episodes, that we can make mercy more common in commerce, but it really starts with us receiving the mercy extended to us. So I hope that you're encouraged in your work. I hope that you see it as something that you're participating with God. You're not doing it for him. And you're also doing it for the benefit of others. We're not doing it just for ourselves. We're not really showing up for anybody but God's glory, and to see how he wants to use that to change us, to change the people around us, and to change our communities. And we'd also love for you to leave a review of the Faith and Work podcast. And if you haven't yet, check out our other podcast called Teach Us to Pray. It is my favorite podcast. It's not informational, it's formational. You should check it out. 12 to 15-minute episodes from our VP of Advancement and Theologian in Residence, Jeff Hoffmeyer. You can find all of this information on denverinstitute.org. Thanks for listening. God bless you in your work.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Faith and Work podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. The Faith and Work podcast is produced by Denver Institute. We believe that when Christians work faithfully, the world will taste the hope and life that Jesus provides. To learn more or to make a financial contribution, visit denverinstitute.org.